Welcome to the Health CEO Playbook, the show where we pull back the curtain on what it really takes to scale a thriving healthcare business without losing your mind or your margins in the process. Today's guest is a true icon in the world of franchising. I've got Mark Siebert, the CEO of iFranchise Group, with me today, with over 30 years of experience and a client roster that would put most businesses to shame, including some powerhouse brands that I think are really important in the healthcare space, like Massage Envy, The Joint. There's a big regenerative one that we're going to talk about too. Mark's been the strategic force behind some of the fastest scaling healthcare and other franchises in the country. And today we're going to dive into what makes these businesses successful. So, welcome, Mark. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Brandy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is fun. So I always love when there's some juice on the bone, a little bit of meat. And you've worked with brands like The Joint. And if you are watching this and you've never heard of The Joint, they are a chiropractic franchise that has taken over in the last, I'm going to say we're like 4 years now, 3, 4 years,
A little longer than that.
a little longer. We also have QC Kinetics, I think you told me about,
Yep.
massive growth in the regenerative space. And I wondered, like, what do you think the reason for these massive level of successes were in franchises like this, which basically become a household name after a couple of years?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about healthcare in particular is that franchising is getting to it a little bit late. From the standpoint of franchising, franchising really started out in food service and in some service-based businesses, and it sort of thrived in those areas for a long time. But for many years, there were very few people that got involved in some of the healthcare businesses, just because I think maybe it was frowned upon, or people thought about it as being, maybe McDonald'sizing the healthcare business. But what people started to realize was that while many people who entered the healthcare professions knew a lot about how to service their clients and really loved that part of the business, they never really learned a lot about the business side of making money at it. And when people did find out ways to make money at it, suddenly those business models became fairly popular, and people, as they realized they could expand through franchising, and they started seeing some of the examples, some of the early examples like Pearl Vision Centers, which one of my consultants was actually the driving force behind, and some of the other examples that started franchising early in this marketplace. They started seeing that, and they said, well, if it worked in the optical area, perhaps it's going to work in the dental area. Perhaps it'll work in, the regenerative medicine area. And people started realizing that if it's going to work in one, that it might work in a lot of areas. And so I think that's one of the driving factors. I think the other thing that's happened recently is that in a lot of respects, it's become more difficult to practice medicine and to sort of survive in the healthcare space than it used to be. Some of the insurance constraints, some of the other kinds of things that have happened from the standpoint of regulation that have just made it more and more difficult for healthcare practitioners, for all the years that they invest in learning their trade and in learning how to service people. They don't get the kind of financial return that they once may have gotten, just because they're spending so much money on insurance and worrying so much about these things. That I think that there's a lot of people who now find themselves in a situation where they'd like to be able to make a little bit better standard of living than they're actually making. And that sort of drives them into going into business for themselves.
Well, and so that kind of leads me to my next question about Massage Envy, because I know that you were instrumental in bringing that across the country. And I mean, I think I saw that they were reporting on average over $1 million in sales per location, and they've got numerous locations across the country. Do you think that that is a replicable landscape, like a replicable business model still in the wellness space in today's landscape? Do you think we could still have that kind of Massage Envy level of success?
Well, there have been a number of companies that have sort of come into that space behind them. So you got Hand and Stone, you've got Massage Heights, you've got some high-end spas that have entered the space, all as franchises. I think that it's a question of how do you differentiate yourself and how do you compete at the unit level. So if you're in the massage space, the therapeutic massage space, how are you going to compete with a Massage Envy? Some people are out there doing facials now. Some people are out there finding other ways to compete, whether it's by differentiating themselves with the business model in terms of how are we going to differentiate ourselves with a membership program, or it might be how are we going to differentiate ourselves with our with our pricing, how are we going to differentiate ourselves with having a high-end kind of experience, how are we going to differentiate ourselves with the service offering. um, it's really about anytime that you're competing in any business, it's how do you compete with established competitors. And once you've figured that part out, it's then about how do you replicate that, or can you replicate that? And that's where the franchise model comes in.
And I feel like almost looking at that MRR piece, that recurring revenue model, it seems pretty common in some of these healthcare businesses that have really soared, right? So we've got monthly memberships. I know that's a big driving force behind Tony and Dean Graciosi's new one that you and I kind of jammed on, Fountain Health. There's membership model within Massage Envy. Do you see that membership model being like a core driving force for healthcare practices? I mean, I guess it's a little bit different for an optical, but is that something that even say an investor or franchisee is looking at and saying, oh, okay, I like that? Because I mean, most of us in the world of business like an MRR as just a like a standard baseline for revenue every month. Do you think that is maybe one of the key things that differentiate the success of these franchises from, just average businesses that have opened up multiple locations doing similar things?
Well, I think that certainly is one of the ways that companies have differentiated themselves. John Lee Niso, I think, was one of the people who really founded that when he started Massage Envy. And he actually came from a fitness space. He came from a gym business model where they used membership as the core of their business model. And that's where he sort of stole the idea from in the first place, where he said, I'm going to take that business model and I'm going to apply it to massage therapy. My partner and his wife was like, this will never work. And his wife is a massage therapist. And she said, no, this is never going to work. But in fact, it did work because people wanted to be able to get the less expensive massages. This is, so for him, it was really sort of revolutionary at the time that people would be able to get these less expensive massages. There was other things that went into the business model as well. So he hired maybe a little bit less experienced massage therapists by going straight out of school and keeping his labor costs down. He really focused on keeping the place full and making sure that the calendars were fully booked. He did a lot of things that were sort of business focused. I think that anytime that you can have a recurring business model, that's always better. But that's not every business. You don't have to have one in order to have a successful business. But if you do have one, that certainly helps.
And so, if we were comparing, just because we're in this hot topic of who's running successful franchises and what differentiates winners from losers, if you will, just to be so super blunt, if we look at something that offers more of a high ticket service, do you see a difference in the model there? Like you have been instrumental behind QC Kinetics, which is, I don't know, might correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't they sell 200 or 300 locations in their first year out the gate? So they've done massive numbers in the regenerative space.
Yes, that's right.
And I'm assuming because they're doing PRP, they're doing injections, therapy, they're doing peptides, their cost is significantly higher than something like a massage membership. Do you see there being any major differences that you could maybe share with our viewers between sort of that low cost, high volume model and then something like a QC Kinetics where they're really relying on a longer term relationship and higher price points with their clients?
Well, I think that any business model is ultimately about finding a way to find an adequate number of clients who are going to be able to use that service and be able to make enough money off those clients on an ongoing basis. So there are going to be certain kinds of businesses that you're going to do, you're going to have a one-off experience with. So if you have a laser hair removal clinic, presumably after you've had 6 or 7 treatments with the laser hair removal, you're not going to need it anymore. So that, but you're going to make enough money and you're going to have enough clients that hopefully you make enough money off those and have enough recurring business from referrals and from your marketing that you can continue to grow your revenue base. So I think that what it ultimately boils down to is understanding the business that you're in and having a financial model that is going to work successfully over time and that can be replicated. And so if it's, whether it's a high ticket, low volume kind of situation where you don't do a lot of work with your patients, or whether it is a lot of repeat business at a lower ticket, either one of those can work as long as you manage the business properly.
Well, and I guess it also leads us to, what makes for a good existing business to be scaled. So if we were just looking at a maybe revenue or some sort of benchmark, is there something where you could say sort of blank statement, if you're not doing this much in profitability or you're not doing this much in revenue, you shouldn't consider franchising your business? I think I'd love to give the viewers just an understanding of like where they're at and whether or not they're even a qualifier for something like this.
Well, I would say it's not so much about revenue as it is about return on investment. Of course, revenue is going to have something to do with it. You can't have a good return on investment without some level of revenue. And there's got to be enough revenue in there for you as a franchise or to be able to take out a royalty, because that's how franchises work. They get a royalty based on some kind of revenue, and there's some workarounds in some of the medically related businesses. But there's a royalty that gets taken off the top of revenues. And if you don't have a substantial revenue base, you're not going to be able to make enough money to make it worth your while as a franchisor. But the ultimate test in franchising is about return on investment. So if I invest $500,000 in a business, I want to make a return on that $500,000. If I invest $1 million, I expect twice as much of a return as I would get on a $500,000 investment. So generally speaking, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for at least a 15% rate of return for an owner-operated business on whatever that investment is, plus a salary that is commensurate with the job that I am holding down as a franchisee, as an owner-operator. So if I'm managing a massage therapy studio and the salary that somebody would normally get is $80,000 a year, I would get that $80,000 a year. And if the cost to get in there was $500,000, I'd want to make a 15% return on top of that, or about a $75,000 a year return plus that $80,000. Because my alternative is I could go out and get a job somewhere and make that $80,000, and I could invest my money in the stock market, and presumably I'd make 10% a year long term.
Right.
So I'd rather get a bigger return by investing in myself. And so that's my minimum. I'd prefer to do more. And if I'm going to do a multiple unit deal where I'm going to sell multiple units to franchisees because there's some overhead associated with that, I'd like to see a 20% return. So on that same $500,000 investment, I want the franchisee to be able to put at least $100,000 to the bottom line. And so then you look at, well, what does that $500,000 generate? Is it $1 million in sales with a 20% net? And then a certain amount of that has to go back to the franchisor in terms of royalty. So all these numbers are post-royalty numbers, right? So you have to, when you're developing that spreadsheet that's going to say, what does this look like? You sort of say, let's adjust this for franchising. So we take the spreadsheet that says, here's how much you're making right now. And we say, if this were a franchise, would I be selling product to the franchisee and taking a markup? So that's going to change my cost of goods sold. I'm going to take a royalty. So how's that going to impact the bottom line? What other kind of cost adjustments do I need to make based on, maybe I've got a corporate car and I've got the corporate golf club membership and some other things in there that maybe as a business owner, I'd like to be able to minimize my taxes, but from the standpoint of real return, those things belong on the bottom line rather than as a business write off. And then I look at that from that standpoint and say, now let's say, how much can I get as far as a salary? And how much can I get as far as a return on investment? And does that meet that 15% plus a salary return after paying that royalty? And that's sort of the acid test that we use. If your viewers went to our website, which is iFranchiseGroup.com, on our website, we actually have that. We call it the acid test. And there's sort of a series of criteria that we look for franchisability. And if they go there, they'll see that there's that acid test, and it sort of walks them through the step-by-step of how they can adjust their P&L to take a look and see whether or not it is, in fact, sort of a candidate for franchising, whether it's franchisable. I mean, there's other things we look for as well, but those are the main things.
Yeah, I appreciate the breakdown on those numbers because I think two things. I think people don't know that franchising is a good way to scale their business in the healthcare space because, as you mentioned earlier, it has been a little bit taboo. I mean, who do they think they are copying the same thing and not customizing it for every patient and allowing other people to get their hands in this business and scaling it across America? And at the same time, I think people that are interested in this model don't really have a true sense of what it looks like because, I mean, you also mentioned it earlier, a lot of the times what's happened in this space is we've got brilliant healers that have done amazing things, but they don't necessarily have the business acumen like you would in, say, the corporate world, or they don't come with an MBA as part of it and understand how to take what they've built, which could be a very stable business in their local community, and triple, quadruple the amount of locations, maintaining brand equity and value and quality of standards and be able to make revenue with that. And I mean, I have friends and clients that buy multiple businesses, and I think I was talking to you about this, Mark, that they just roll them up and change the brand. So you're making your own franchise, if you will, initially because you're starting one brand and you're just taking other people's businesses. And a lot of people in this space, if they've been approached to be acquired, it's something similar that's happening. I mean, in fact, The Joint did a lot of that where they would go and acquire local businesses and just sort of absorb them into their umbrella. Do you feel like this corporate roll-up model is sort of, I mean, to me, it's maybe a little bit new, but you're the OG in the space. Is this just part of every model where you might look to own a few yourself and acquire ones to just put your brand on it initially to get the first, I don't know, a couple locations going, or is that something that's kind of separate from the franchising world?
Well, it's sort of separate from the franchising world, but they all sort of tie together in terms of motive, right? The reason why companies turn to franchising in the first place is really three things. One, it's you can expand a lot faster. Now you can expand really fast when you're doing the roll-up model as well. The second is you get highly motivated management. And highly motivated management means people are in there and they're in their day-to-day who are, I mean, they're investing their life savings a lot of times. They're going to be highly motivated to make sure it succeeds. They're not going to, if they don't like the job, they're not going to just walk off the job one day and not give you any notice. But the third thing is you're using other people's money, right? So you are expanding with other people's money. With a corporate roll-up model, you're the one who's got to provide that money. So when you're franchising, a lot of times people will start their growth strategy with a franchise model because they don't have the capital to be able to grow fast enough to meet their goals. So if I've got 2 or 3 clinics or 2 or 3 locations of whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'm trying to grow my business, I may have a certain amount of capital. I might be able to open 1 clinic a year, but if my goals are out here and my ability to fund it is up here, I've got to bridge that distance. And the way to bridge that distance might be by franchising because I can use other people's money to achieve that growth. Once I get up here, and now I'm starting to get a lot of royalties and a lot of fees. Now I've got a lot of capital to work with. Maybe I go public where I've got even more money to work with. And the fact that I've got all this money to work with and the fact that I've got all this capital behind me allows me to start doing this roll-up strategy. So after I've had that initial success from franchising, now I'm in a position where I can start buying. And sometimes franchisors, once they have started to really saturate a marketplace, they'll say, where do I spend all this money? And they'll say, well, this is such a good business model. Why don't I start buying some of my franchises back? Or why don't I start rolling up in other markets where I haven't yet saturated? Because they know that the business model works. So a franchise strategy can be a step in the process, or it can be the entire strategy, depending on what that person's or that business owner group looks like and what they're looking to achieve with their goals.
And so I love that answer. That really adds some clarity. And I think, I mean, I'm really excited for people to think bigger when it comes to expansion. There's a lot of changes in the economy. There's a lot of changes daily in the political environment, but there's also a lot of things coming down the pipeline with our ability to automate and use AI for a lot of roles. The purchase of and the growth of businesses that can't be taken over by robots is something that people should probably pay attention to. I know that I do, and I love AI, and I'm excited for all the robots until I'm not. But in this day and age, there's a lot of things that they're going to help us with. Do you see the emergence of AI happening in any of the businesses, whether they're in the healthcare space or in the food service or in a variety of different, I know you guys have your hands in hundreds of different franchises. Do you see AI coming in and making any waves at all, Mark?
It absolutely is. Right now, I think we're sort of in the early stages of AI and sort of its penetration of the franchise marketplace. Its initial uses are a lot of times being done in the franchise marketing space, where it's being used to help tailor messages and to help drive the franchise marketing campaigns and sort of on a real-time basis, adjusting pay-per-click bid campaigns and doing other things to help optimize the franchise acquisition process. So as a franchisor, one of the things you want to do is sell franchises. And if you're going to be good at it, you have to understand AI these days, because one of the things that has happened more recently is, and if you start looking at statistics, one of the things you'll find is pay-per-click advertising has started to diminish in effectiveness because people are getting the answers with Chat GPT before they get to the paid ads. So they'll see the Chat GPT answer up top. And what they found is when Chat GPT posts an answer, the number one post gets 37% less clicks than it used to get. So the clicks that you get through your PPC advertising are diminishing. So in order to be more effective with your marketing, you have to be very cognizant of making sure that you're really at the top of the search. You can't be on page 2 of these things anymore. So you have to sit there and say, I'm going to be at the top of page 1. I have to have a message that really resonates with people. And these are the kind of things that AI is helping people to do. Now, from the standpoint of labor efficiencies, AI is also helping a lot of different businesses. It's helping people from the standpoint of consumer marketing. It's helping people from the standpoint of labor efficiency. There are a lot of things that it's doing at an individual business level, but I mean, I'm not a real expert in AI. I sort of just watch some of these people and some of the things that they do, and I just sort of marvel at what they do and say, this is just great to watch, because I think, like you, I just love the fact that I can just watch this stuff and just sort of see what's happening in the world out there, and you know, I
And
grew up in a
get
time when
ready
I thought it
get
was
ready
funny.
for all get ready for all the changes that are coming, because they're coming fast and furious. I think one of the things that you said, Mark, that's really interesting to touch on, and it does make a lot of sense for anybody who's feeling the pinch of, relying on paid ads traffic, is that your brand actually has to be really strong now, and you need to take advantage of all of these different avenues of marketing, because if you rely on just one and something comes in and changes it, like Chat GPT or any of these other LLM models, And that's where your core growth was from. That can represent a massive loss, especially if it's feeding into multiple locations. So I think what this is all coming to is a reminder that you need to be everywhere. Your brand has to have value. People have to know, like, and trust you, but also care. So it's less about me, it's more about them. And I think a lot of businesses are starting to change the way they do their marketing because of these adjustments. And so, if nothing else, it does make things certainly more competitive. And I appreciate that your oversight in keeping an eye on how it's filtering down. I mean, we've put together some really cool things for training. So as an example, in the past, you would have had a training process that would have a certain cost to it. And then you would have had maybe an operations manager that is managing the new trainee. And so there's all these costs associated with training somebody and then following their training through quality assurance of their training before they take over the role themselves. And all the while, if they have a question, they're either manually asking somebody or they're sifting through past videos or SOPs or manuals to get the answer. And I mean, we're solving problems all day long, but something super cool that AI can help with is, hey, you can just train a bot with all of your SOPs and all of your training information, and your new staff member can just, or anybody on your team can just ask it one question and it pulls that exact answer. Which, I mean, if you were ever the one responsible for hiring and training staff, especially at scale, that's a pretty big game changer and cost saver. So there are some definitely interesting things, and I'm curious to see which of our large franchises are biting into them sooner rather than later, because I think there's a whole customer journey that the expectations are changing. And some companies, as you know, adopt to change faster than others, even if they're a new big conglomerate. Some of them are like, yes, some of them are, oh, I'm just going to wait a while and see how this goes. So, yeah, it'll be an interesting time. I have some like rapid fire questions if you don't mind.
By the way,
Yeah. So, what's one franchise that you wish you bought into?
that I wish I bought into
Yeah.
that as a franchisee,
Yeah.
none.
Oh, tell us more.
If you want to be a franchisee, you got to be willing to follow other people's rules. And I am not a good rule follower. The people who are franchise, the people who are good franchisors are usually the people who are the rule breakers. And the people who are entrepreneurs are usually the rule breakers. Almost all my clients are entrepreneurs. And I tell them, if you see somebody who reminds you of you, don't sell them a franchise because they're going to break the rules. They're going to be somebody who is not going to be a good fit for you. What you want is somebody who is not, who wants the safety net, who wants the control, who wants to follow the systems. And I'm not that person. And I know myself well enough to know that I'd be a lousy franchisee. I'd be bucking the system all the time. And I would hate being on, I haven't had a boss in 40 years and I, don't want one now. So, none.
That's it. That's a great answer. And honestly, friend, I feel the same way. And I love that advice. If you see somebody that has the same characteristics of you, don't sell them a franchise because they're going to mess with your system. I love it. Okay. Is there one characteristic that all successful founders have?
Uh, I know it's a rapid fire question, but I don't have a really fast answer for you. I think that the they're good managers and they're good with people. And I think that the characteristics that they have is they care more about the success of their franchisees than they care about making money. They really care about their brand and the success of their franchisees. That's where their priorities lie. If you really focus in on the success of your franchisees and the success of your brand and keeping your brand standards high, you're going to do much better as a franchisor than if you're in this business to try and just sell franchises as fast as you can, regardless of who you sell them to.
I think in our healthcare space, at least every person that I've met, and I've been in it for 15 years and I've met thousands and thousands of practitioners, I think they would all feel the exact same way is that their business is their baby. And very first is success of the people that have invested in them and their baby. And second would be the revenue. So I completely agree. Maybe we'll go with one that's a little bit easy. What's a common mistake that first-time franchisors make?
Selling to the wrong person is a real common one. People oftentimes, when you invest in franchising, you might invest 50, $100,000 or more. I mean, if you want to be aggressive with a franchise program, you can spend well over $100,000. You can spend a couple $100,000 to launch a franchise program. So you spend a couple $100,000. It takes you 6 months to get ready. By the time that you're ready, somebody comes along with a check for $50,000 and is ready to sign. And you're thinking, okay, sign on the dotted line, give me the check. And a lot of times that first franchisee is the biggest mistake, because you really want to make sure that you vet these people and you get the right person who's a good fit for your organization. And if they're not the right fit, you got to walk away from that check. It's the hardest job in franchising, but it's also the most important job. Walking away from the guy with a check for 50 grand that is just not going to be a good fit for your system.
I guess it's almost like hiring a good staff member, looking at it the same way. You wouldn't want to let somebody in your door that isn't a good fit. It's kind of the same thing. The difference is you're paying them as an employee or they're handing you a check, but you really don't want them in your world if they're not a good fit, right?
Absolutely right. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right. But it's a little harder when they're giving you a check for 50 grand,
it's
especially when
hard.
you just spent 200.
It's hard to say no to $50,000 checks.
Yeah,
It's not,
I think
I don't know
so.
if it gets any easier. Maybe
Yeah.
for Bezos it gets easier. Um, I think a question I would love to have the answer to for our audience is if a founder's still in the day-to-day operations of their current business, what's the first role that they would need to replace in order to scale themselves in a franchise model?
Well, the new roles that you have as a franchisor, the first new role you're going to have is selling and marketing and selling franchises. So what will happen typically in a new franchise organization is day one of when you've gone through all the process of getting yourself ready to franchise, you've gone through all the processes. That's what we do, is help companies get ready for franchising. So you develop the strategies and the operations manuals and the training programs and everything else. Now you're ready to sell. You got your legal documents in place and you're ready to go out there and start selling. Day one, somebody's got to start running those ads, answering those phone calls, vetting those people and selling them. That can be you, or they can be somebody else. And then somebody else is going to have to be responsible for training and quality control. Those are sort of usually two separate people, because people who are really good at sales don't usually tend to be as detail oriented, as some of the people who tend to be really good at quality control. The quality control people tend to be, very detail focused, and they're looking at every little thing. And the salespeople are more seat of the pants kind of guys who are maybe a little bit less detail oriented, and they don't usually tend to be found in the same person. So as a founder, you got to sort of make a decision. Are you the salesperson who's going to be the person talking about your business? You're going to be the person who's going to be teaching and training these people and supporting them in their early years. You can be one or the other, but you probably can't be both.
Well, and you could also probably be neither, but you would have to commit to hiring two
That's
people
right.
on your team to scale, right? I can't imagine somebody that's doing successful numbers in their practice would want to venture into training or sales if it took away from revenue generation that made more sense in another direction. So that would mean if you're a founder that is doing day-to-day work now and doing well, then you need to hire two people basically from the get-go,
Or you need to hire somebody to replace yourself in the day to day.
or you got to get yourself out of there. Yeah, smart. And so, what's the number one question you ask to test if a business has franchise potential? If somebody came up to you and you're just looking at them from a really 30,000-foot view, is there something that you could ask somebody to determine whether there's potential in franchising their business? Or do they need to go to your website and do the acid test?
Well, there's three things that I look for in a business. I mean, so it usually starts out when I talk with people, I usually start with a conversation about whether or not their business is franchisable.
Okay.
There's three things I'm looking for. The first is whether or not I think they can sell franchises. So when I'm looking for whether they can sell franchises, I look for, do they have something that's unique? Do they have something that is getting some kind of attention, maybe is it getting press? Is it getting social media? Is it well received in the marketplace? Do they have credibility in the marketplace? Do they have more than one unit? They don't have to, but Massage Envy started with just one, but not everybody is fortunate to have something that's that unique when they get started. But I look at whether or not they can sell something. Then the second question I look to ask is, do they have something that is replicable? So have they developed manuals and systems? If not, there's companies like ours that can develop them for them. But good businesses have systems, whether they're up here or on paper. You have to ultimately get them down on paper. Do they have something that works in multiple markets? Do they have something that is going to be readily teachable? Maybe not to somebody who doesn't have the correct educational background, but to somebody who does. And then third, do they meet that asset test of financial? And then from there, it's really what makes businesses successful. And that's how good is the market? How good is does the concept fit that market? And ultimately, how good is the management team? Because good management will fix financial problems. They will fix the market issues. They will fix concept issues, but there's no cure for bad management. So you want to find somebody who has a team around them, hopefully, or they themselves are at least competent managers that can help from the standpoint of putting something together that is going to be successful. And then from there, the thing that I ask people is, I really want to find out, do they need to franchise in order to meet their goals? A lot of people sit there and they sort of just let inertia drive their growth. And what I try and do is I try and say, where do you want to go with this business? Where do you want to be 5 years from now? And let's work from the end point backwards instead of saying, just let's try and make it better. I mean, I think that most physicians would probably sit there and say, if I have a goal for somebody, I'm going to start with what their goal is. I'm going to say, here's what your goal weight is, and here's what you have to do to get there. They're not going to sit there and say, okay, we have less calories and we're not going to have any goals for you. They're going to start by saying, okay, hey, Mark, you're, a little bit porky. You need to, but let's get you down to, 180. And in order to get there, here's your plan over the next 2 years, and here's what you have to do. And so what I like to do is I like to try and say, here's what your goal is. Here's where you have to be at a certain period in time. And that's what your goal is. It could be, and it's not my goal, it's your goal. It's your business, your goal. Do you need to franchise to get there? Some people don't. I've had people come into me and they say, my goal is right here. My current reality is right there. And I tell them, look, open up 2 more locations. You're fine. You'll be there. And they're like, oh, thanks. And I've had other people who say, my goal is really far away. I'm saying, well, the only way to get there is going to be to franchise or to raise a lot of equity. And, if you can't raise the equity, then you're going to have to franchise.
And so, Mark, when you guys go into a practice, so somebody's interested in franchising, they reach out to your team and you guys go in, you assess the value, you determine whether or not they're too main character focused. You guys look at their SOPs and make sure it's a scalable model. And if it's not, you basically tell them, like, look, here are the 15 things you need to do to get this ready for sale. And then here's how we're going to sell it. Is that kind of what you guys do?
Yeah, so what we normally do, I mean, if somebody's interested in franchising their business, we normally go through the exact same process with them initially. We'll ask them some preliminary questions. There are a couple other people besides myself and my company that will meet with them. But we've got a specialized healthcare practice, as you pointed out. We're the only consulting firm in North America that actually has a specialized healthcare practice that focuses on franchising. And what we will do is one of our healthcare folks will sit there and say, let's talk about your business. Let's talk about your goals. Let's figure out whether it's franchisable. Let's figure out whether you need to franchise to reach your goals. If your business is franchisable and you do need to franchise, here's the game plan for what you need to do in order to achieve those goals. And here's how we can help. And if your business is not ready yet, then here's sort of what we think you need to do in order to get ready. Um, we're not really in the getting people ready business because I'm not a specialist in every form of doing business, but I can tell people in general the kinds of things they need. And for people who are just interested a little bit, for some of your listeners, I've got a book on how to franchise your business. And, I'm happy to send them a copy of the book if they'd like to take a look over it and read through it and figure out whether or not franchising is right for them. It's a big step, but I think for a lot of businesses that if they've got something that's special, I think that for a lot of businesses, it's a great way to grow.
Well, and I mean, if you look at the companies that are doing really well and you ask yourself, where am I going to be in X amount of years and how am I going to reach my goals? And should I have jumped on a train 5 years ago that took me to where I need to be? Franchising might be the answer. I appreciate you offering copies of your book. That's super sweet. I'll put a link below this chat so people can go and hang out on your website and find out more about you guys. And if somebody's listening to this and they're interested in finding out if their business is franchisable and what that looks like, go and hit up Mark Siebert and the group over at iFranchise. They know all the secrets because they've been launching all the big businesses in this space. And I know actually Mark has written a white paper all about the intricacies of the healthcare specific pieces that you need to be aware of when it comes to franchising in healthcare. There's a lot of legalities and things that need to be in place. So for some of our people that might be watching this that want to invest in something and they aren't already familiar with HIPAA and, issues with kickbacks and all of these things that are a challenge in the healthcare space, Mark knows because he wrote the paper on it.
I'm
And
happy to send them a copy of the white paper as well.
yeah, thank you, Mark. That's great. There are some things to know. There are legal things, as you all in this space know, the challenges that we face dealing with some of the regulatory stuff, good and bad. But Mark, I wanted to thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I appreciate that you keep it raw and real. And it's not for everybody, but for the folks that it's a good fit for, it could be a very lucrative growth or exit strategy for their business. And I just want more people to know how to make more money and impact more lives in this space. So I appreciate you being a guest on the show.
Thanks so much, Brandy. It was great being here.